Forgive the blur, but it's not going to matter. As this goes along, it'll supply a lot more information. Just need to know that the Anglo-Saxon of the English is the Anglo-Saxons Jutes, and their origin point is over here, Anglo-Saxons Jutes. Listen carefully to the geneticist speaking, and then I will comment on the history of the Anglo-Saxon migration and Francis Pryor's propaganda.
By comparing Y chromosome information from different populations, Marcus tried to establish how closely the populations are related. He discovered that there was an unusually high similarity between DNA from Britain and parts of Holland.
Within England, all the towns look very similar, but different to the Welsh towns. And the more remarkable feature was the incredible similarity between the English towns, genetically, and the Frisians. In fact, we couldn't statistically tell any difference between them.
This suggests the native British Y chromosome has, at some point in history, been mixed with that of people from Northern Europe. Complex statistics were used to work out when this genetic mix might have happened.
We conclude we would need the mass migration in the last 2,500 years that was 100% replacement, or if it was less, it would have to have been more recently. And if we assume that that mass migration was the Anglo-Saxon mass migration, then we estimate that that replacement must have been between 50 and 100%.
The sheer completeness of...
Now this was discovered at Sutton Hoo, an Anglo-Saxon burial. As I described before, during the Latin and the Anglo-Saxon origins of people, we have the Celts living in Britain, and the Romans came in, or you had the Romano Celts or the Latino Celts. The Roman army had to leave because of the Visigoth attack on Rome in the early 5th century. Then we have all of our historical records talking about these people coming in, these Nordic people or Germanic people from Denmark, Germany, Sweden, known as the Anglo-Saxons, the Anglo-Saxons and the Jutes. Now they come in, they have a different religion, basically the religion of the Vikings, Thor, Odin. They have a different culture. They have different rules to their society. They have different laws. They have different art, as I said before, different religion and different language. And we see they have completely different DNA. What Francis Pryor is trying to say is that these people with identical DNA to the Frisians, and Frisian is almost a preserved form of Anglo-Saxon, like the language in Beowulf, that these people, although they are genetically identical to all these Nordic people, that they lived in Britain pre-Roman times, and they lived amongst the Romans until the barbarian invasion of Rome happened, and then they voluntarily, overnight, changed their language, culture, rituals, gods, religion, forgot everything that the Celts and the Celtic Romans practices that they were practicing, and then became Germanic, which is positively ludicrous. That when they were a Germanic people before the Romans, they were acting 100% Celtic, even though they were genetically German. That doesn't make any sense. Everything supports the immigration and extermination. That would be like me claiming that I'm Potawatomi, and that everybody around the Chicagoland area is actually just Potawatomi, and that we were here before, the United States or Christopher Columbus or Cortez or anything. It's just silly. It's a way of these modern English people wanting to link themselves back to the Roman Empire, when at the time of the Roman Empire, they were living in Denmark, they were living in mud huts and eating dog, and they couldn't read, and that the Irish at the time were more educated than them. It's a really weird, ethnocentric, bigoted way to try to skew history. That's what it is. I'm sorry. That's exactly what it is. Now, I referenced this, or I mentioned this in the video I made about the Anglo-Saxons, and this bothered me. It's it's an English guy who made a documentary claiming that the Anglo-Saxons, the English, actually never came from anywhere else. We can see exactly where the Anglo-Saxons and the Jutes came from. See, I don't know if you can read, it says Saxons up there. And if I blow this up, the Frisians, the Angles, the Jutes, and the Saxons. Just to give you an idea of where these people came from. Here's a better one, and where they landed. Mercia. And the modern day Frisians speak a form of language that is almost identical to the ancient Anglo-Saxons. This is where they landed, and they happen to name their places Wessex, West Saxony, Essex, East Saxony, all this, and they were speaking English, and they were from Angleland. And this is from the 5th and 6th centuries, or these images are portraying settlement in the 5th and 6th centuries. And also has this dotted outline, which was Romano-Britons. And the Britons remained, again, as I said before, in Wales, and some of them fled to Ireland or Hibernia. Here's another one about where the Anglo-Saxons and the Jutes came from, or the English, and when they settled in Britain. Here is one where it shows where the Jutes and the Saxons and the Danes and the Frisians and the Angles came from, and where they wound up. And they even distinguish between themselves and the Britons, even though we call English today Britons. This here you see Northumbria, Kent, the Thames River. It's not the Thames, it's the Thames. Wessex, Mercia, Northumbria. And they're coming from where the Frisians, the Saxons, the Angles, and the Jutes came from. And here's another one. This is where they settled. And here's the people. These people are genetically the same. Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and England. Now you would think the English would be closer genetically to the Welsh or the Irish. Culturally, linguistically, ethnically, and genetically, they're not. They're closer to the Germans, these Germanic people.